Hello everybody, Jason here from the At the Coalface podcast. I've created a new sub-series called Mentoring Moments, and Mentoring Moments is composed of clips taken from my one-on-one and group mentorship sessions where we discuss e-commerce, digital, retail, and so much more. Hopefully you get a lot out of this. Enjoy. Cool. All right. Well, look, we're 6 minutes in, so I'll go ahead and I'll open up the floor to questions. And look, we'll go ahead and kick things off. There may be some people that join. We did have, I think, in the last session, we had some people that joined sort of 25 minutes in and then 30 minutes in. So people will float in and float out, which is no problem at all. But it is great to have you guys along. I've really enjoyed doing these mentor sessions. I've learned a ton. It's been really challenging because obviously you don't necessarily know what you're going to get asked in advance. You try to answer on the fly to the best of your ability, but it's always fun. It's always challenging, and it always leads to some really great conversations. We've had some fantastic conversations so far, both in the group sessions and in the one-to-ones that I've been running also. So I'm doing at the moment about 2 hours of mentoring a week, and I've just found it fun, and really it just forces me to stay on top of my games. So I've really enjoyed it. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to whoever wants to start with their questions first. Feel free to put up your hand and just ask away, and then we'll go ahead and kick things off that way.
I guess I might have a question. It might be, you probably already had this answer previously. I might miss it somewhere. Whenever I see on LinkedIn, I don't know how we got connected. Somehow I used to work in a partnership in e-commerce, my previous role. I think because of that, everyone down there knows Jason Greenwood. So every time I read your post on LinkedIn, right, it's like you have all these numbers that like all description, like where do you find this information? I'm like, does he have a dictionary? Does it have an assistant? It's very extensive. And I'm like, how can I be that resourceful one day on LinkedIn?
That's a really good question. And no, I don't have an assistant. I do everything myself. I do all my own posts. I don't have a VA. I do all of my consulting on my own. I don't have a VA for that either. So yeah, look, I think it's a combination of a few things. One is I've got some really good Google alerts set up for various topics of interest to me. So they come directly to my inbox once a day. And that really helps to ensure that I don't miss anything major that's coming onto the e-commerce radar. I try not to miss any major announcements. Sometimes I do, or sometimes there's just such a great volume of it in any given day that I can only speak to one or two things happening. I can't speak to all of it, obviously. In terms of, I guess, terminology or industry lingo, things like that, I guess I try to stay away from lingo wherever I can. I try to stay away from acronyms. It can't be entirely helped. I guess when you've been doing something and you've been working in a specific vertical or a specific industry for over 20 years, it just becomes part of your language, right? I think every industry has its own language. IT's got its own language. My wife has worked in interior design for years, and they've got their own language. So I think every industry has its own lingo, and you don't want to sound condescending by using that lingo on LinkedIn. And I try not to, but some of the terminology is industry specific, and it's hard to avoid whilst also sounding knowledgeable about a specific subject. So it is a bit of a delicate line to walk to try to make your content as easily digestible and understandable and accessible to as wide of an audience as possible without diluting your content to the point where it actually doesn't help anyone, to where it's quite generic. And I think that is the fine line that all of us walk when we're putting out content on any major social media platform. It's how do we get cut through? How do we make an impact? How do we have a positive impact without being dull and generic? Because we've all seen, I think, that the funny cat memes, they always get great attention. We find that polls are getting vigged heavily on LinkedIn, so they get lots of attention. The more generic sort of philosophical posts tend to get lots of likes and attention. But is that the kind of attention that you really are looking for in terms of building your audience? Because I'm a real believer that your vibe attracts your tribe, right? Your vibe is, if you stay consistent with who you are and you produce content first and foremost for yourself, because that's what I do. I produce content so that I can learn. I produce content so that I'm forced to stay current, to stay relevant, to stay up on what's happening in the world. I produce content second for my audience, and third, a distant third, almost an afterthought, is maybe some business will come out of that. But when I first started producing content, I didn't even have a business. So it wasn't like I went in with an ulterior motive to say, how can I create content that's going to be a lead magnet? So I guess those are some of my initial thoughts around content, around language, around industry specific lingo, that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
If I can jam on that, Jason, I think that makes a lot of sense. But one of the topics that we jokingly talk about, and I don't know if you can see in the background there's a little rubber duck. We have a phrase called rubber ducking. Have you come across that one before?
Never heard of it.
Okay, so the concept of rubber ducking is that where it became popular, there's a website called Stack Overflow that anyone who's been in the tech industry will have used. It's sort of a question and answer website where people can pose a question and then they'll get answers, and the community can upvote or downvote if the answers are actually relevant, as opposed to forums where you could just get randoms. Anyway, Stack Overflow found this issue where people were writing out this really long question, putting clearly a lot of effort, spending half an hour or something rather writing this question, and then they would abandon it and not actually post the question. All right. And they're like, what's going on here? There's something, we've clearly got a bug in our code. The website's not working. Why are people, they must be incredibly frustrated that they've gone to all this effort and then the system's broken. And they're checking, they couldn't find anything. And what they realized was that by going through the effort of forming a really good question, people answered their own question. So the intellectual rigor or practice about trying to just step out of the weeds of, what's going on, and taking that big picture view to create something that is well enough described that another person can help you step through it is actually enough for yourself to step through it. And so the concept is go get yourself a rubber duck and literally, if you want, hold the rubber duck in front of your face and ask the question to the rubber duck being a proxy for another human being. It's not to do with the rubber duck clearly, but it's just that metaphor about being able to take the time to lay things out in a really logical way. And so I think that's key to getting what in all forms of communication, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's long form posts, or even asking good questions, is to try to practice that empathy about what is that other person what's going to resonate with them, what's going to make sense for them, rather than just looking at it through your own context. So I don't know, does that make sense as a concept?
Makes complete sense to me. And I would add to that, I would agree with that. And I would add to that when I first started out making content on a regular basis, I was pretty crap. The content was, I look back on it and I think, it was okay, but I can see an evolution in my own ability to articulate. I can see an evolution in my own ability to write better, to make things more concise, to get to the point faster in a post, to make 2 or 3 solid points in a post, whether that's video, long form, audio, doesn't really matter. Even making the podcast, I've definitely gotten better at a process of interviewing and getting good information out of guests. So it is a process. And luckily on any social media platform, when you first start out, you have no audience. And so at the end of the day, you're practicing with a very small audience. So it's not like you're gonna be putting your beginner content out there and it's going to be seen by 100,000 people. That's not the way that it works. So fortunately, what typically happens is your ability to create evolves, and your ability to create gets better with time and with practice, and your audience grows at about that same rate. So they grow in tandem with each other. And so that's a very good thing. And when I've spoken to people saying, I'd love to start putting out content, I have lots of things I'd love to talk about, lots of things I'd like to share from my industry, but I'm a bit nervous about putting my thoughts out there. I'm a bit nervous. I'm not a fantastic writer or speaker or whatever they might say. I've had a lot of people approach me and say, how did you get started making content? And the reality is I just started doing it. And I've told this story before, but really I was following Gary Vaynerchuk for probably 3 or 4 years before I started producing content on a regular basis. And he just continually really hit home and really kept putting it in his audience's face. If you think you're a thought leader, if you see yourself as a thought leader, well, you have to put your thoughts out there. You have to put your thoughts out there and open them up for critique. And so I think that that's really just getting started, and making that first step and being consistent with it is how you hone those skills. And in tandem, you'll grow your audience and your skills will grow at about the same rate. Does that help, Unita?
I think Gary Vee is a really interesting example. Sorry, Jason.
No, you go ahead, Jonathan.
Gary Vee, he's just been doing this for so long, and he's inspiration for so many people and been successful in so many different domains. He's got a lot to offer. He's also a pretty polarizing sort of figure. You love him or you hate him. I think that's is that a conscious choice as someone who's looking to raise their profile on a platform? Am I going to be that divisive clickbait sort of person that's really just trying to be sensationalist, or am I going to try to strike that more balanced tone and acknowledge that there's multiple sides to a story? Do you think that's a conscious decision?
No, look, I think I'm a polarizing character anyway, personally. I always have been my whole life, even before I ever was on any social media platform. As a general rule, when people meet me, they tend to love me or they tend to hate me. There's very little gray area. And that's the way I've been, even from school days and everything else. Either people tend to be my closest friends or my most mortal enemies. And it just seemed to always be that way. And I find also that translates reasonably well on social media anyway, because in order to get cut through, you have to take strong positions on anything that you're talking about, Otherwise, it's difficult. You get lost in all of the vanilla content out there. You can get buried by it. And so I think that what at times is a liability, because being polarizing can be a liability, particularly in business, it certainly can be. Again, it goes back to that whole thing of your vibe attracts your tribe. The people that follow me and consistently engage with my content and enjoy what I'm putting out, they obviously appreciate aspects of my content being somewhat polarizing, taking a strong position. I don't ever write content specifically for to be clickbaity, meaning I'm not looking purely to drive engagement by saying something inflammatory, but I'm also, by the same token, not afraid to take those strong positions on something I believe in and something I think is true, and to speak with confidence about that. And so I think that does translate from what I've seen pretty well to social media. And do I think that do I agree with everything that Gary Vee says? Absolutely not. No question about that. I think that the hustle porn thing, he's backed away from the hustle porn aspect of things quite a lot over the last couple of years. And I think that's a good thing, because I think people misinterpreted what his idea of hustle porn is. I think people very early on, and if you listen to if you only listen to one or two pieces of his content at a time, then you probably would get the mistaken idea that he's just an arrogant prick, frankly, that is full of hustle porn culture. And the reality is that he's actually not. What his position always was and has always been, and he's been pretty consistent about this position, is if you are not where you want to be in life, it's going to take work to get there. Otherwise, if you don't want to work, then don't complain about where you are, because the two go hand in hand. If you want to change your station in life, then that's usually going to require a fair bit of effort. And he's quite happy if you don't want to work and you don't want to hustle, that's absolutely fine. But then don't, on the other hand, complain about where you're at in your life, because you've effectively neutered yourself from getting out of that position by not being willing to work really hard. So that's where I fall on the Gary Vee thing. Again, don't agree with everything that he says, but you cannot argue with his effort. You cannot argue with his work ethic. You cannot argue with his success on social media. I don't think anybody could argue with that.
Hey, Jason, I've got a bit of a, might sound like a bit of a dumb question, and I didn't actually prep with questions, but it's related to, I guess, what you just covered off around how you learn, that type of stuff. With so many different, I guess, topic or areas in the digital space, from UX, SEO, the digital marketing, personalization, coding, platforms, that type of stuff. How do you have you got any recommendations for, I guess you can't be a master of all of them. Have you got any sort of hot tips on how to pick the right ones, or not necessarily the right ones, but how you go about choosing the areas to upskill more in? Because there's no way you can upskill and stay top of your game in all of the areas, or it's incredibly difficult. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess for me, I just do what interests me. I focus on the stuff that I find naturally I gravitate towards. And I know that early on in my career, that was a little bit tougher to do, because most people working in e-commerce now, of course, in the very early days of e-commerce, nobody knew what they were doing. And in fact, there's an argument to be made that none of us still do. But in the very early days, it was such a new industry, and it was such a new thing to consider, that there wasn't a tremendous amount of specialization yet in the industry. At the start, all of us, I think to a degree, were generalists, all of us who are non-developers, that is. Obviously, the developers went down their own path, and there had always been software development in the world. And so software developers that wanted to get into e-commerce or digital, they turned their hand to web applications, they turned their hand to websites, they turned their hand to web development. They'd come out of software development, and that looked interesting to them. But for those of us who weren't developers, and I've never been a developer, and I have no desire to be a developer, but for non-developers, we had to be, particularly in the beginning, a bit of a jack of all trades. We had to do a little bit of it. We had to dabble in a little bit of everything. I had to dabble in SEO. I had to dabble in SEM. I had to dabble in AdWords. I had to dabble in channel strategy. I had to dabble in all of the technical side of setting up a catalog in an e-commerce website, and what does that look like? And we had to start to figure out, oh, okay, Google wants to see all of this rich data in text format around products so that we can get things indexed properly. Oh, Google doesn't want us to build an entire website in Flash. Funny that. So we had to learn a whole lot of broad range of skills on the fly in the early days, because no one had it all figured out. And Google was, to a large degree, dictating all of our careers in the early days. If we wanted to be indexed online, it was Google telling us how to do that. And so they really were the arbiters of success or failure online in the very early days. Now, it's less so nowadays. And so I guess what I found as the industry grew and as it matured, it bifurcated. And it bifurcated along two primary lines. One line was marketing and one line was technical, right? And so what you'll find even today for working brand side, most e-commerce managers will have a bent one way or the other. They will either lean more towards marketing skill set and a marketing background, or they'll lean more towards a technical skill set and a technical background. Now, because the technical side of e-commerce always interested me, and I've always been quite a technical person, that's the side that held my attention. And so therefore, that's the path that I went down more than anything else. And so therefore, and as I grew my career, it was always leaning more towards the technical than the marketing. Now, I understand marketing, and particularly from a personal branding perspective. And of course, everything to do with the technical side of e-commerce lives at the apex of business, tech, marketing. We're living at this apex of stuff that all culminates in usually some sort of marketing use case. And so it's being used to market our services or our products online, ultimately as a sales channel. And so I think it's beneficial to understand all these different elements, but I think, as you rightly point out, it's very difficult to specialize in all of it. So whether it be the course of my career and what I focused on, or even from a content perspective, I tend to lean towards the more technical side of our industry. And I think that shows through in my content as well. And so I guess to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I gravitate towards the technical. I enjoy the technical. So that's the lens that I tend to see our industry through mostly.
Any sites or sources that you'd recommend for improving your technical? Because I'm from more of the marketing side of things. That's where I gravitate to. That's where I've come from. But yeah, certainly needing to weight my skills on the other side of things, just because of the nature of my job, I need to, and also to stay fresh in that area.
Yeah, I think the way that I initially started to dig deeper into the technical side of our industry was by working for agencies. That's honestly being surrounded by developers, being surrounded and talking to developers on a daily basis, and having to act as the interface between customer requirements and dev requirements, sitting in the middle and being the hot potato in the middle. That really dramatically develops your skills. When you go and ask a developer a question and they don't give you the answer, they say, this is how you get the answer. Oh, here's the API docs you should be looking at. Or here's how to use Postman and go run some API tests so that you can make sure and connect to an endpoint and you can understand how this works. Or the developers that I've always gotten along with the best are the ones that don't necessarily give me a straight out answer, but can point me in the right direction so that I can, and I've always been an autodidactic learner. I've always learned mostly on my own. I never went to university. I never got a degree. So I've always been very much a heavy autodidactic learner. And so if someone can point me in the right direction, and with Google nowadays, you can point yourself in the right direction. And with most platforms, you can set up a free trial account, test account, 14 days, 24 days, 30 days, whatever it is. And so most platforms, most technologies will allow you to learn for very cheap or nearly free in most instances. And so that's where I think I got my bent. And that's why I still to this day, I speak more like a developer than I do a business analyst or a solution architect or something like that, because for many years now, I've communicated mostly with developers. And so I think you pick up their lingo, you pick up their way of thinking, you pick up their way of seeing the world, the more you get exposed to them. But I'm naturally also a people person. And so I naturally gravitate towards customer facing roles when I was working in agency land and getting in and doing the solution architecture, doing discovery, running discovery workshops with clients and doing the business analysis and all that sort of stuff. So that's how I got there. But I think you can still get there. Even if you don't work in agency land, I think you can get there by participating in more developer-oriented forums, by joining more developer-oriented groups around e-commerce, by having these conversations and developing friendships and relationships with developers, by looking at more, even when you look at the things in the newsletters that you sign up for. So I'm a subscriber to, I don't know, probably 20 industry newsletters. And most of them lean a little bit more towards the technical. Now, Retail Dive and some of those others are more generic industry newsletters, or TechCrunch is a little bit more generic. But a lot of those do have quite technical stuff in them. And so that would be, I guess, my advice is either if you can't go and work in an agency and be exposed to developers on a daily basis and kind of be forced to understand their lingo and their language and their way of seeing the world, then you can force that upon yourself through other channels, would be one of the ways I think you could do it. Jonathan, do you have anything there? Because obviously you come from a deep tech background.
Yeah, I was just laughing because at the start of this chat, we were talking about the 5 people you surround yourself by. You become a hybrid of those. So exactly to your point, if you're going to spend time around people who really know what they're doing, then to some extent that happens by osmosis. But I think it's also about the culture within that group. We have a saying that the 3 most important words in our organization, I don't know. There's no shame in saying I don't know. In fact, it's an empowering phrase, because when you say that in a safe psychological safety type of environment, everyone leans in. They're like, oh, okay, here's something new. Let's actually go find that out together. And people want to contribute. And even if you want to take it to the next level, it becomes like that difference between imposter syndrome and growth mindset. So imposter syndrome is, I don't know what I'm doing, and it's only a matter of time before everybody finds that out, versus a growth mindset is, I don't know what I'm doing, and it's only a matter of time until I work it out. But we exist in this world where that continual learning is A, necessary, and B, with the right mindset can be really invigorating. And if you can surround yourself with people who share that love of discovery, and the rising tide lifts all boats by sharing that knowledge, then that's a real superpower, I think. So, and to your point specifically, Jason, about what do we see as an agency lead and coming from a technical background, I've said for a long time, the most important person, the most important role in any digital project, e-com, if you will, is the non-technical person who asks good questions. Okay, so just in a really positive and constructive way, but question assumptions and have we thought about this, and what are we going to do when these 2 things come together? And that sparks really valuable deep dives. Even if you don't have the technical knowledge, you're asking those logical questions.
I was going to say that in response to Gareth earlier. I think, Gareth, one of the things I would maybe offer is, you said you're from a marketing background and want to up your technical game. I think the most important thing, and that kind of leads into what Jonathan just said, is to be what you are and to be real, not to try and become a techie when you're not. And it's that will lead to exactly what Jonathan was just saying. It's just a matter of time before that shows up. I run and have been running a software development company for 25 years, and I'm not a programmer. I don't know how to write a single line of code, but I'll ask the questions. I'll ask the business focused questions of, why aren't we doing it this way? Is there a better way we could be doing this? And all of those things. And my team around me will answer those questions and find a solution. But I would never propose to be a programmer. I'm not. So it's important to stay within your domain and to add the value there, but to understand I have an idea of what can be done with the software development, but I can't do it myself.
Yeah, Gareth, very good question. I do get this a fair bit. And even when I was running agencies and helping to mentor people within an agency environment, I would often get that question. And oftentimes when I would meet a new developer, they would assume by the conversations we have that I am a developer. They would just naturally assume that I'm a developer. And I would have to explain to them, no, I'm not a developer, but I just happen to be highly technical. So you can speak to me using your traditional language that you would use with other developers. You can speak the same way with me and I'll understand maybe 80, 90% of it. And if I don't understand, I'll ask the question. I'll say, hey, that doesn't quite make sense to me. Can you explain that to me? I don't know anything about what you're talking about. And so I think it's about being transparent. I think it's about being honest, but I think Mark makes a very good point, which is if you don't naturally gravitate towards the technical, then you may not find it interesting anyway. Even if you put yourself in an environment where you would be exposed to that more technical side of our industry, you may not enjoy it. You may not like it. You may go, actually, that's not for me. And one of the ways to figure that out and to find out for yourself is to maybe go and set up a Shopify store from scratch, or to go and set up a BigCommerce store from scratch, or a Squarespace website. Like, for example, on my business website, I recently just rebuilt that whole thing, and I'm not a designer either. Using some basic out-of-the-box templating with some minor tweaks, you can make a website look pretty good now, a simple, basic website now I'm talking about. And I was able to figure out, they've introduced some new commerce functionality with Squarespace, and I was able to figure that all out. I was able to figure out all the more technical elements of how to implement a Squarespace site just by doing it. I spent about a week in the evenings going through all that and just working my way through it. And there's a lot of skills, and you probably know this from the marketing side of things, there's a lot of skills that become pretty rapidly transferable. So if you're a deep technical specialist on Magento, Shopify, BigCommerce, VTEX, whatever, if you're a deep technical specialist on those platforms, a lot of that knowledge will transfer to a new platform because you go, okay, BigCommerce does this thing this way, and this platform does things this way, but these are the analogs, right? So if you think about product tags in Shopify versus custom fields in BigCommerce, BigCommerce or meta fields in Shopify versus your custom fields in BigCommerce. There are analogs in almost all of these technologies. And it's the same whether you're learning a PIM system or you're learning a CDP or you're learning a point of sale system. They all have fundamental structures, data structures inside them, and fundamental pieces of functionality that if you learn those pieces of functionality within one system, they will usually transfer, maybe not directly, but there will be basically, as you increase your body of knowledge, learning new things becomes easier and faster because the concepts will transfer, if nothing else.
I have another question, Jason. First of all,
Sure.
Sorry everyone, I'm like yawning here. I just got the COVID-19 booster, so I'm like feeling funky. Obviously, you're big on e-commerce, right? But what's like other industry that you're following closely and why?
Yeah, so I think that e-commerce nowadays, because it is so broad reaching and it's very rarely implemented in isolation, it is just but one channel of most multiple channels that businesses will want to sell and market through nowadays. You have to keep, at least for me, I have to keep my finger on the pulse of retail, the convergence of retail and digital. I have to keep my finger on the pulse, B2B, because I specialize in B2B e-commerce very heavily. And so I stay across the whole B2B industry as much as I possibly can in evolutions in the B2B space and how B2B businesses operate in the modern world. I have to stay across omni-channel in all of its forms. And really, I also have to stay across, to a lesser degree, the marketing aspects of our industry. Even though I'm not going to go as a consultant, I'm not going to go and run campaigns for my clients. I'm not going to go and help them with their marketing strategy, but I have to understand those things because those are the types of things they want to talk about when I get into discovery with them. So they want to say, here's our marketing plan, here's our marketing goals, here's the channels we're executing on today, here's the channels we'd like to execute on. We need to, for example, we want to start executing on marketplaces, for example. Okay, how are we going to do that? How are we going to put in place an omni-channel system to send out your catalog, to pull back down orders, et cetera, et cetera. So I think for me, all of the, industries or press or news that I stay up with, they all have almost an immediate adjacency to e-commerce. They might not be directly about e-commerce. I also have quite a few interests outside of our industry. I live in an off-grid tiny house, and I'm into anything with an engine and jet skis and motorbikes, and try to have and always expand my interests outside of our industry, because I find that keeps my brain growing and challenged in different ways. And it can oftentimes, I don't know why, but I could be out walking my dog, and some of the best thinking that I do is out there when I'm in nature and I'm walking my dog. Now, I'm not specifically thinking about e-commerce, but it just, things bubble up through. So I think by having a really broad base of interests outside of your immediate work sphere, I think also helps and keeps your brain quite elastic, because our industry is filled with very rapid change, and it's speeding up as well. I've been doing this 20 years. And the last 2 years, obviously, specifically with COVID in particular, has just put a rocket underneath our industry. And so if you are not pretty comfortable with very rapid rates of change, you're going to be pretty uncomfortable in our industry. And so you do have to have a pretty elastic brain and an elastic mindset and really embrace that change, because I've discovered throughout my career that not everybody's like that. Not everybody enjoys the pace of change of our industry. For many people, it's actually very scary, because they think, if I don't manage to keep up, I'm going to be made irrelevant and I won't be able to have a job. I won't be able to keep my job. I won't be able to advance in my career. And so it's a little bit terrifying when they say, I'm trying to juggle kids, I'm trying to juggle family life, I'm trying to juggle all these 50 things on my plate, but I'm also trying to stay current in my industry. It can feel quite overwhelming with the pace of change in our industry. But I think if you can do things that continually challenge you, things that you enjoy, then you'll probably be fine.
And I think that builds off what we were just talking about to Gareth's question before as well, is that having one specific skill or something is much less sustainable in the long term. It's about having that mindset about learning enough to be able to contribute in conversations and ask good questions, because that's something that you've learned today may not be relevant in 6 or 12 months. Again, reflecting on our experience, we've got a really broad recruitment strategy where we have staff who come from all sorts of background. We have people who we've hired in the last 12, 18 months who used to be a nurse, who used to be a professional poker player, who used to be a carpenter on building sites, who used to be a circus manager. A full-time job was traveling the world, booking shows and travel for a circus. No animals, it's okay, it's cool, it's just humans. And then retrained into a different industry. And it's that ability to have life skills, to communicate, collaborate, and the take initiative to teach yourself whatever the skill of the moment that you need. That's super powerful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Definitely that autodidactic learning and embracing autodidactic learning, I think, is a critical skill, and not just in our industry, but I think in any industry, particularly as industries go in and out of vogue. If you think about what Elon Musk is doing and the impact that's likely to have on the entire driver for hire industry at some point in the midterm future, with driverless cars, driverless trucks, driverless everything, we have the driver for hire industry globally is one of the largest industries in the world. And there's a whole lot of people, there's millions of people that are going to be coming out of that industry as driverless vehicles become the norm. There's millions and millions of people that are going to have to retrain, and they've been a driver for hire their entire life, entire career. And to Jonathan's point, I think that all of us, we don't necessarily know. We know that the rate of change is fast, and we know that it's speeding up. We don't necessarily know what we're going to need to know in 6, 12, 18, 24, 36 months time. But if we have the confidence that we can learn it, then that's going to put us in a pretty good space of at least personal confidence to attack that with confidence and with pride and with excitement, looking at it as an exciting opportunity as opposed to a terrifying challenge. And I think that's the key differentiator.
I had a question. It might be slightly basic, but understanding. So I actually moved from a traditional marketing to a completely e-commerce and digital role. And the one thing that I always need to, or rather I always struggle with, is understanding. Somebody asked me a question, what's going wrong? And then if the sales are not happening, if something's not going on, I don't know how to look under the hood and really pinpoint the specific issue that's happening with relations to my e-commerce store sales not happening. So is there a particular methodology in how you can actually go and audit what's happening and what are the issues that are happening within the business? So various metrics that you can look at, because there's so many of them. It just gets a little overwhelming understanding which of these metrics are really contributing to the decline. That's the first question. And the second is, how do you then keep yourself abreast of all the new terminologies? Are there a list of newsletters or subscriptions or other stuff which you can actually subscribe to, where you can actually keep abreast of what's happening and improve your skill sets?
Yeah, look, very good questions. Look, I'm not specifically a digital marketer, so I don't really specialize in doing digital marketing. That's not what I do. I don't live in Facebook Ads Manager every day, but what I can really only speak to trends primarily. And I think that from a trend perspective in our industry, and I think I've mentioned this before, Rishab, is that the industry is changing dramatically, and consumer expectations around how they're marketed to are changing rapidly, probably at the fastest rate I've seen in over 20 years of working in this industry. And so I think that performance marketing as a whole is, when we're thinking of paid and performance or direct marketing or advertising, which I actually I hate aligning the word marketing with those channels, because they are sales channels. If you're expecting a transaction or conversion to happen within 24 hours to 7 days, you're doing digital sales. You're not doing demand generation, which is when I think of marketing, I think of true demand generation, not lead generation and not sales. I'm thinking of demand generation and building demand generation over time through a multitude of channels. And I think that the modern consumer is hyper aware of sales-based or transactional marketing. I think they're immune to it and are growing a very thick skin to transactional marketing. And when I see my brain, it's so weird. When I'm scrolling through Instagram or I'm scrolling through Facebook, which I actually don't spend hardly any time on Facebook, but when I do and I'm connecting with family or whatever, but when I'm scrolling through my feed on Facebook, it's so strange. Like, my brain is almost completely immune to the marketing messages that are in my feed. It's like my brain can skip it without me even consciously doing it. And I think that what I've seen is that even with tech, which now, because they are producing more and more marketing capabilities or delivering more and more marketing capabilities that are more like traditional digital marketing on TikTok, I'm finding that I get super annoyed when you first open TikTok. I don't know if you've noticed, but now they will freeze your screen so that you have to see 5 or 10 seconds of a marketing post before you can even get into the app and start scrolling. That is super infuriating. Like, it is so infuriating. And it's relatively recent that they've made this change.
Yep.
And what I've seen even on TikTok is that the blatantly paid and performance advertising, again, my brain just auto skips that piece of content. But where a piece of content is organic feeling in nature, even if let's say it's an influencer that's doing marketing on behalf of a brand, but it's a very organic feeling post, it's an entertaining post, it's a fun post, whatever, but it's clearly a marketing post, I will engage with that content. I will view that content because maybe I like the creator, or I like the style, or I like what they're doing in that piece of content. So I think the world is changing pretty rapidly away from interruptive transactional marketing to more experiential marketing, which is more true, genuine demand generation. And I think if you have something that is relevant to your target market, then I think if you are producing content that is generating an affinity for your category, generating affinity for your brand, generating an affinity for the specific products that you're selling, then that is likely to see more sustainable long-term success than the transactional marketing that I see most marketers doing today.
Sure, understood. And that's something which is rare in this industry, because a lot of them and most businesses also don't understand that needle needs to shift from basic PPC performance and that which gets measured every week to how actually you can drive awareness and lead the channel through the funnel, and that leads to the sales. So that's important to know, and great. Thanks for the answer. So next one is in terms of you spoke about a lot of newsletters and editorials and stuff that you subscribe to keep on top of things. What other kinds do you recommend for people entering into the industry to subscribe to and keep on top of, so that they are also growing up as the industry is evolving?
Yeah, look, obviously my taste in content is primarily geared towards the more technical, but if I was in marketing, I would, and obviously I do have connections with many digital marketers, and I think that the content that I get, or the value that I get through my connections and their content, is probably more valuable than any newsletter, any one source of industry news or industry content, because we have to remember that oftentimes industry content is paid content. It's like an advertorial, right? And so we have to be very aware of that. And so I think it can skew our view of the world versus getting it from authorities that are actually practicing what they preach every single day, that they're actually doing the doing as opposed to doing the pontificating. And I follow people like Chris Walker. I follow people like Rick Watson. I follow people like Adam Kitchen. I follow people that I respect who are working in the marketing space primarily. And when we look at somebody like a Chris Walker, he works specifically in B2B SaaS marketing. His entire mindset around marketing, I think, is really relevant to where the world is at today. And so for me, I think that finding people that you trust and respect and following their content is potentially more valuable to you and in the moment, because they're putting out content usually every single day that's really relevant and current and in the moment. I think that's potentially going to be more relevant to you. If it resonates with you, if their content resonates with you, then follow them. If it stops resonating with you, unfollow them, or you can de-emphasize them in your feed through platforms like LinkedIn. So that would be probably my advice. And then again, I think that Google News and being able to set up Google News alerts for specific areas of interest, it's going to surface those major newsletters if they're published online, and if it's published through a news site, for example, it's going to show up in Google News. So that would probably be the two areas that I would suggest you focus on.
Sure, thanks.
Do you know any good podcasts, Jason?
There's the Ecom Fuel podcast. There's my podcast. There's there's even Rick Watson's podcast. There is the State of Demand Gen podcast, which is Chris Watson's podcast. There are quite a few good podcasts out there. I find that most e-commerce podcasts other than mine, they almost exclusively focus on the marketing aspects of e-commerce. The top 10 podcasts in e-commerce in the world, in terms of rankings on the major podcast engines, they all have either a bent towards marketing or a bent towards merchant stories. So they will get merchants on and they'll talk about what's working for them, what's not working for them, etc. Or they'll talk about the latest marketing technology or the latest marketing tactic, or what's working, what's not, from paid performance, SEM, SEO, CDPs, all the zero and first party data, death of cookies, all that sort of stuff. Definitely, if you're into marketing and digital marketing in particular, and you want to listen to podcasts, well, just about every single e-commerce podcast out there specializes in the marketing aspects of e-commerce. So you have plenty to choose from.
Great, thanks.
Take us back like 20 minutes ago when you were talking about not needing to know everything. So as everybody knows, I was recently unemployed. And when I was going through job listings, I would notice under the requirements section, things like Georgia's was required. I don't know that platform. I know Salesforce, but it was a requirement on the job listing. So now I'm like, oh, I guess I got to learn that too, when it could be a really easy learn for a company that's got teachers and people that'll show you the ropes. I don't think it'd be hard for me to move what I know over into new platforms. So how do you narrow in what you have to learn? It's actually how I ended up here too, because it doesn't hurt to be in a room for an hour with really smart people. How do you like narrow in what you need to learn so that when the requirement on a job listing says Georgia, Salesforce, without me being the person who jumps out and is like, I guess I'm going to go learn that now.
So just to clarify, this was an ad placed by Gorgeous themselves, like for you to come and work for them, or an agency that implements Gorgeous?
Yes, it's a company that uses them as their customer service platform.
Yeah, then that's easy. Gorgeous offers a free trial. So I would go and I'd start a free trial of Gorgeous. I'd navigate my way around the platform. It's a super easy to learn platform. They've got online learning modules for their own platform. They've got lots of tutorials for their own platform. My podcast, I've interviewed Jasper. So you can Google Gorgeous podcast, for example. You could go to my podcast and you could listen to the podcast with Jasper, where we talk about the Gorgeous platform. We talk about customer service using and leveraging the Gorgeous platform. You could go and set up a free trial of Shopify, connect Gorgeous into that. Your free trial of Gorgeous, you could connect to your free trial of Shopify. You could get them talking to each other. You could place some test orders in Shopify. You could see how that information flows into Gorgeous. So I think with virtually zero cost or at very low cost, you could learn the ins and outs of the Gorgeous platform inside of a week, well under a week, if you're pretty technical and you come from a Salesforce background. Basically, if you come from a CRM/help desk /customer service background, then you will pick up Gorgeous very quickly. It's a super, super easy to learn platform, and they have excellent training and help documentation. So that if I was serious about a role and it looked like a role that I was a really good fit for, then I would definitely take the time to go ahead and learn enough about that platform that you can say, yeah, I've got a bit of experience with Gorgeous. What level do you need me to be at? Do you need me to be a Gorgeous expert, or do you need to have intermediate Gorgeous skills? Because I've got intermediate Gorgeous skills, but I'm not maybe an expert. I haven't worked with it for years and years. So you can be honest. You can say, yes, I have experience with Gorgeous and I know how to use it. And you wouldn't be lying after a week's time of playing around with the platform. You would no longer be lying. You would be telling the truth. And the reality is those skills, even if you didn't get that specific job, there may be other roles that come up, because Gorgeous is the #1 e-commerce help desk in the world now. And so there will be many roles. If you were going to work for an e-commerce brand, in many cases, they'll be running Gorgeous. So this would not be a wasted skill. And even if they had some other help desk, let's say they had Zendesk, Freshdesk, or let's say they had some other help desk platform in place other than Gorgeous, those skills and those concepts that you will learn from Gorgeous are transferable to other platforms. So it's not like it would be a waste of your time and energy, and it would just be a bit of time. Like from pure dollar value perspective, it would cost you nothing to learn a lot about that platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
Yeah, so you go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt, but I guess if I can just add one little thing on that, and I'm going to flag my privilege right now in that I'm not the one who's looking for a job, and I know that comes with a particular context. But what I would also say is, if you do engage with that hirer and you've gone through exactly what Jason recommends, which I think is great advice, and they're like, oh no, we really need someone who's got this deep expertise in this one platform, and they're not prepared to recognize the value in your history in Salesforce, maybe that's a sign it's not the right role for you anyway.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing point. I did get a job though.
Yeah. Hey, congratulations.
In the beginning, someone's in the beginning, you'll figure out later on. Just say yes.
Yeah.
We'll see, but just say yes. I love that too. Fake it till I make it, right? That's my point, is that nobody's actually looking at these skill sets you have in other platforms and saying, oh, that's easily transferable. Now it's marked as a must-have in the requirements list, instead of saying, oh, she's got 10 years of experience on this platform, she's going to pick this one up easy. So
did they give specifics about, sometimes they'll say need 2 years of experience with a platform, or 1 year, a minimum of 1 year's experience? Did they just say you need experience with the Gorgeous platform? Is that all they said?
I actually pulled it up to jog my memory. All it says is experienced in Shopify, Georgia's, and other support/service platforms.
There you go. So because they haven't given a stipulation, you could get that experience in less than a week, is I guess what I'm saying here, is that if they said you need to have worked with the Gorgeous platform for 2 years to even apply, that's a different bar, right? That's a different level of expectation. And then that goes back to what Jonathan said, which is, are they a good fit for you? If they're so narrow-minded that they say, okay, you have to have 2 years of experience on this specific platform before you can even apply, then maybe it's not a good fit for you. But if they just simply say experience with, Gorgeous, Shopify, and or equivalent platforms, then I think that's a very realistic ask, right? If you're going to come in and you're going to be running a help desk using help desk software, then it's definitely going to be beneficial if you have some exposure and experience with help desk software. And they probably don't want to train you from scratch. They're willing to train you, but they don't want to have to train you from scratch in all of the help desk concepts. And if you've got a little bit of experience with that because of self-training or because of previous roles or because of previous platforms that you've worked with, then that should absolutely not only get you in the door, but you've clearly got the gift of the gab, and then you have the opportunity really to sell yourself from there.
Yeah, I ran into this issue with 2 separate employers. When did that shift change? When did it change where it went from, hey, if you got experience, we know you're trainable, we know you can pick this up quick, to must have experience for this platform or that platform? Is it simply a money saving technique on the company side so they don't have to train?
First of all, I would say that not every employer, I think, has gone down that path. I think they will openly say oftentimes, need to have experience with Shopify, Gorgeous, or equivalent platforms or similar platforms. That's what I see more often than must have specific experience with this platform. Now, that's a different story if they're hiring for an administrator. So say, for example, they're going to be hiring a Salesforce admin or a NetSuite admin, senior admin, then you have to have those levels of experience. If you're just going to be a user of those platforms and you have some either direct experience or adjacent experience, then I don't know too many employers that would, and sometimes those are throwaway things that a recruiter will put into a job ad because it's what they think the employer wants, but the employer sometimes doesn't actually require it. And so what I would say is I would be very confident if let's say I was looking for a job and it was going to be working with a platform that I had zero experience with, but they offered a free trial of that platform, I would go and I'd spend half a day digging into that platform, learning my way around it to where I could confidently navigate it, understand the technology that platform uses and all of its navigation tabs and all the subsections of that platform and how it roughly works. And so that I could, within a half a day, I would get to a place where I could speak pretty confidently about that platform, at least in an interview scenario, to where I could gauge, once I actually got there into the interview, I would then be able to gauge what depth of knowledge and experience they actually needed me to have in that platform. And if I came away from interview one, because most places are not going to just do one interview. Most places are going to do 2, maybe 3 interviews before they make a final hire. And so you have an opportunity immediately after that first interview, you now have an opportunity to go away and go, oh, okay, they seriously want someone that knows this thing inside and out. Then you might have 1 to 2 weeks before your next interview to really dig in deep and start to understand to a much deeper level if you really want that role. And it does go back to that question, do you feel more importantly that it's an environment that you can learn in? Do you feel it's an environment that's going to be supportive, that it's going to be encouraging, that it's going to feed your soul as well as your bank account? And sure, if you're desperate, maybe you just have to take a job in the short term that maybe isn't a great fit whilst you look for the dream job. I think these are some tactics for you to be able to secure those jobs where you may not know the specific platform in question.
I also want to add something, Elizabeth. Like, I've been in a lot of job interview before this job, and I think it's like a lot of time you just also have to make connection. For example, Gorgeous, if you go to LinkedIn, there's like a guy, Chris Lavoie, like partnership, everyone knows him and he's very nice. And you just reach out to him. People are open to help. So if you reach out, say, hey, I'm interested to learn. Can you have half an hour so he can tell you what do you need to know about Gorgeous? That's like faster way to learn about something. Then I'm not as technical as Jason here. I can't just go inside and learn by myself. I'll fall asleep. So like for me, that's how I work with me.
I don't know. I think I'd be nervous just sending random DMs to people.
Oh, believe me, that's how I think Jason and I know each other. I just DM him. It's normal. On LinkedIn, it's normal. It's not Instagram, right?
Yeah, it's a different story.
Okay.
Look, I would agree with you, Unita. I think that if you are trying to pitch me and sell to me in a cold DM, that will merit an instant block from me on LinkedIn. I immediately block. I don't even respond to those requests. But if someone messages me and says, hey, I've been really enjoying your content, I'm a little bit stuck, I'm between careers, or I'm looking for a new job, or I'm trying to learn this new platform, or basically any other question other than trying to sell me, I will always respond. I will always respond respectfully, and I will always help wherever I can. And most of my other people that I follow on LinkedIn, I know do the same. And people that I respect on LinkedIn will do the same. They will never, unless their inbox is just so full that you slip through their cracks for some reason, then they will always respond. They will always do so respectfully, and they will always help where they can. Because at the end of the day, we all got where we are with help. Like, I didn't get to where I am when none of us are an island. I learned from lots of great people that came before me. And yes, there's a lot of stuff I learned on my own. Absolutely. But to even have the confidence to go out and learn on my own, I've definitely had a hand up in many instances. And most of us that are pretty good at what we do in our career, we're more than happy to send the ladder back down again, because at the end of the day, you're the people we're going to be working with in the future. It's that circular economy. It's that circular mindset, right? It's that help everyone mindset wherever you can. Don't be a dick. I have a strong no, don't be a dick policy in my DMs. If you're a dick, you get blocked. If you're not, if you're reasonable and you're respectful, you won't get blocked. And I will help you to the end of the earth wherever I can.
I have now written down all your names.
Awesome. Go and connect with everybody on LinkedIn.
Jason, just a quick one. I saw in one of your posts probably about a year ago that for your consultancy, you don't do it on an hours retainer basis. It's a fixed value basis. How does that work in terms of setting expectation of what's expected from you and what's going to be delivered to the client? I suppose you probably give them over and above the value, but I suppose you always have people that want and expect more.
Yeah, look, I guess we do a clear discovery call, like an intro call. It's not a full-blown discovery, but before I ever take a client on, or before I ever commit to servicing a client, I have to be confident that it's a good fit, both for me and for them. If I don't think that I can service them at the level I expect of myself, then I'll be honest with them. I will tell them straight out, look, I don't feel I'm a good fit for XYZ reason. However, I think I can probably point you in the direction of someone else who might be a better fit for you. And look, we'll part as friends. I'll be transparent and honest, and they go on their merry way. If I feel like they're not a good, meaning that let's say they don't meet my ICP requirements, my ideal customer profile requirements, and I have to let them down gently, I'll explain to them, not in huge levels of detail, but I'll say, I don't necessarily think you're a fit because of XYZ reasons at the moment. However, you may be in the future when you get to be a little bit larger size, or you start to go down this pathway, or you start to need to do a replatform here, or you want to do an org redesign, or whatever it might be. I'll give them 2 or 3 areas where I think I might be able to help them in the future. So it's not just this cold, I can't help you, bugger off. And so I'll try to give them some really valuable input, even if I can't help them. And then if I do think that I'm a fit, usually when they've reached out to me, the reason that they've reached out to me, so I don't do any outbound marketing at all. All of my marketing is inbound. So it's through my content, it's through referrals, it's through agencies that I've worked with, and they know me, and so they'll refer business to me and vice versa. So I think for me, it's a little bit easier than it would be if you had to do a lot of cold outbound demand gen, for lack of a better term. It's not really demand gen, but it's really demand capture. I always want to be a magnet, not a lasso. That's how I look at myself, and that's how I look at my content. I don't want to go and lasso customers. I want to be a magnet that draws them to me. So it's a little bit easier for me, because usually by the time a customer gets to me, they know my name, they know who I am, they've seen a lot of my content, they already feel like it's probably a good fit, and so they understand the value that I bring to the table. But where it's let's say it's a referral, and they don't necessarily know me that, maybe they've heard of my name, but they don't necessarily know how I can help them. They don't necessarily know the services that I provide. Then during that initial alignment call to see if there's a fit, I'll start talking through the types of services that I provide, and I'll try to explain how I provide those services and what my Fit for Commerce framework looks like, for example, the areas that we'll cover, the areas we'll dive deep into, the areas we will just stay a little bit surfacey on. And really at that point, it then becomes their choice. The other rule I have is I never try to sell the unsellable. So if they show clear resistance and they say, oh, I don't think we're a good fit, then I'll say, yeah, absolutely. That's no problem at all. Maybe at some point in the future, you'll feel I'm a good fit for you and we can talk then. So I'll never try to drag a customer kicking and screaming towards my business. I know what my value prop is. I know that I offer services that no one else offers in the way that I offer them. And my pricing model is 100% unique. I've never found another consultant that does it the way I do it. And so I know the value that I bring to the table. And so mine is a fixed monthly service. It's not a retainer, and it's all you can eat with a fair use policy applying. So I have a framework around the fair use policy, and it's very transparent and clear. And yeah, that's how I manage it, is an all you can eat fixed monthly fee fair use policy applies, and they get access to every single service that I offer.
When you say all you can eat, what does that define? Because you don't want someone ringing you 4 times a day.
It has a reasonable hourly fair use policy associated with it. And it also allows for some flex up and down. And always when I engage with a client first off, the first couple of months are usually heavily loaded. And so the first couple of months tend to be the most intense because you're going through deep discovery, you're going through deep solutioning, you're creating documentation, usually like a BRD, a business requirements document that then has to be sent out to agencies. You're helping them with search and select of platforms and partners. So the first couple of months tend to be super heavily loaded in terms of the time commitment and the effort commitment. And then it settles into a more normal cadence once you get past those first sort of super hectic months. And I've never had to have that conversation with a client where I've said, hey, you're taking advantage of this policy. Either I'm going to have to terminate after 30 days because I reserve the right in my terms of service. I reserve the right to have that conversation about the fair use policy if they continually breach the fair use policy. And I reserve the right to terminate clients midterm with 30 days notice as well. And so I guess I've put enough of a safety net in place to protect me from the downside risk whilst also making it super easy for the client to engage. And I haven't, knock on wood, I haven't had any problems yet in nearly 2 years of doing this. So I guess it could happen in the future where a client really tries to take advantage of that, but they've all been very reasonable. They've all been very respectful, and it's worked super well.
Yeah. Do you have different tiers for the pricing then, or is it client by client and project by project basis?
No, it's absolutely clear and transparent pricing. It's listed on my website. It's a subscription basis. And basically the only difference to the monthly pricing would be the length of term that you initially sign up for. So I have month on month, which is the most expensive way to engage. I have 3 month, 6 month, and 12-month terms. And basically the longer term you sign up for, the lower the monthly fee.
Thanks. That's great information.
Very happy to help. No, that's a fantastic question. Yeah, so it's a funny one. When I first started doing this, I saw that most of the consultants that were out there in the market either had like an hourly rate, a day rate, half day project rates, and then retainer rates. They had a matrix of pricing that was so confusing that I thought, man, and I understand the concept where there's mystery, there's margin. Like I get that. And I just never wanted to play that game. And so that's why I set the pricing the way that I did. Plus, I don't like tracking every single minute of time and the administrative overhead that goes along with that. And giving a customer a phone book of time entries at the end of every month just didn't sound like something that was fun for me. So that's another reason why I set up my pricing the way that I did, because it can create friction between you and the client, and it can create friction in the way that they will hold back on asking you questions, or they'll hold back on engaging with you if they think every minute is tracked and they're going to get billed for every single minute. Whereas if it's fixed price, they're a little bit more open with you because it's less risky for them and they know exactly what they're going to be paying every single month.
Yeah, definitely. That's where the agency model is definitely very broken.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, I come from an agency background, so I get it.
It's just pump and dump without the actual real strategy, isn't it?
Yep. But look, I also understand agencies, the difficult place that an agency is placed when they're paying, their team members an hourly rate. And then they effectively have to make a margin on their hourly rate by reselling that to clients at a higher hourly rate. But even if they call it fixed price, it's still effectively selling time for money. And so they have to be able to scale. And so it's a challenging place that they're in. But I think most agencies could implement some form of all you could eat model with a fair use policy applying. I think it's doable. I think it's much harder for them to manage, at least at first, until they get used to that model, moving away from either the project-based fixed price model or T&M model, or moving to a retainer model for managed services. Most agencies really struggle to move away from those models.
Yeah, like the hourly one works for development or tasks, but for the proper strategy side of things, you can't put an hourly. You can't do that hourly because I suppose most agencies don't have the people that can open up a strategy and develop a strategy and implement it. We've done this for somebody else, we'll just do it for you. And that can lead to a big mess.
That's actually where I get a lot of my work, to be honest. Agencies, when you look at particularly e-commerce agencies, the vast majority of the lion's share of the staff are developers, right? And so that's the engine room of the business. So until a project can get to developers, until it can get out of discovery, design, and into development, that's where they can scale their business. They can scale it once it gets into the development team. That's the engine room. And so they try to get through the initial strategy phases, the discovery, BA phases, the design phases. They try to get through those phases as quickly as possible because that's usually where they're the most lightly resourced as a business. And they're really just trying to capture requirements, not help merchant define their requirements. And that's, I guess, what also partially differentiates an agency versus a consultant such as myself. My entire business is built and predicated on that first messy strategy bit, right? It's based on people, process, tech, and data. So those are the areas that I cover with my clients. And those are the areas that historically most agencies are particularly weak in. And so they want to get through those first phases as quickly as possible. They want to write down your requirements. They don't want to spend a whole lot of time helping you arrive at your requirements and helping you actually define those requirements in the first place. They just want to write them down and document them. And that is why agencies are structured the way that they are, is because the lion's share of their resources are in the development portion of the business.
Yeah, and the salespeople don't care about the dev side of things, and the devs don't care about the customer journeys and the user experience.
Yep, never the twain shall meet, unfortunately, sometimes. The better agencies have a tight relationship between the UX, UI designers and dev. And usually, in my experience, the best agencies will go through, for example, before a design is put out for the client for review and feedback, it will go to the development team. It will go to a tech lead first for review to make sure what's being proposed can actually be delivered on the target platform as well. Or they'll say, hey, if you make this one tweak here, we can deliver this in half the time of the way that you've proposed that it be implemented from a design perspective and an interaction perspective. So the best agencies break down the silos between particularly strategy, design, and development. They break down those silos through the design process and UX development process. That's where the silos tend to hurt the overall project the most if there are silos there.
Yeah, that's super information.
If you'd like to register for free for the Mentor Sessions with Jason Greenwood, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason. See you there.